Amazing. Right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the November EDS UK Woking meeting. For those of you who are new to the Woking support group, my name is Ju Westwood. I'm the area coordinator. I'm also a health coach and sound therapist working with EDS clients. Today, I'm really excited to introduce Chloe, also known as the Calm Gut Dietitian. Chloe's been a qualified dietitian for over 13 years now, including more than a decade in the NHS. And she's really become an expert in gut health, histamine intolerance, MCAS, EDS POTS, all things that we care about. She advises national charities like Mast Cell Action and the IBS Network. And you may have also seen her featured in the media, The Times, or on the BBC. I think what really makes Chloe's work so special, though, is her personal connection. So she lives with IBS and celiac disease herself. Her husband has MCAS, POTS, and long COVID. So she really understands our challenges on a day-to-day level. Through her practice, Chloe helps people all over the UK access compassionate and evidence-based support. And we're especially excited that Chloe is now partnering with EDS UK as part of the Nourish programme. So hopefully you'll be hearing a lot more from Chloe in the next coming months. So let's all give a warm welcome to Chloe, and I'll hand over to you.
Thanks so much. It's so cringy hearing about yourself. So nice to meet you all. It's nice to actually be able to see you because I do so many presentations where I can't see anyone. So it's nice to actually be able to see that some of you are there. So great. Like you said, I'm doing other webinars for EDS UK in the next few months. So we've got a whole one on MCAS and diet coming up, a whole one on gastro and diet next year. So what I've tried to do in this presentation is do bits of everything, but obviously it's not in as much detail as some of the other webinars that I'll do. We're going to give an overview of diet generally, no matter what conditions you have. I'm going to talk about EDS specific diets. I'm going to talk about diet and gut symptoms, MCAS and diet, POTS and diet. So we're going to cover a little bit of everything. So if I do go too fast or there's any questions you have at the end, please do say. Some of you have already sent in questions anyway, and I've tried to incorporate them into the presentation. So food is more than just calories. So for anyone that lived through the 90s, calories were everywhere, but food is so much more than that. So it is fuel. It does provide energy for movement, repair, daily living. But even if you're not able to move that much, your body still needs fuel. Your brain needs fuel. Your muscles need fuel. You need food to do your basic functions. You also need the nutrients that that food contains. They communicate with our cells, our genes, they keep our body healthy and provide the building blocks for your tissues, your hormones, your neurotransmitters. So actually, it's way more than calories. It's an active player in how our body functions and heals. So I'm just going to talk about what food's made of. Some of this will be really basic for some of you, and then some of you may know nothing about nutrition. So I've tried to pitch it in a way that you can all access it. So macronutrients, there's three of them. There are three types of nutrients that our body needs in large amounts. So carbohydrates, so things like rice, pasta, bread, gives us the energy and the fuel for our bodies. Protein is found in things like nuts and seeds, beans and pulses, meat and fish. And we need it for energy, growth, and repair. And it's really, really important. And I see a lot of patients who maybe aren't getting enough protein because of food sensitivities, because they're unable to prepare the foods in a way that's accessible for them. So there's so many reasons why we might not get enough protein with these conditions. Fats, I think, have been given a really bad rap over the years, but actually they're essential for things like our hormone production, keeping our nervous system healthy, our brain healthy, and absorbing certain vitamins. We probably all know about the sort of bad fats, the saturated fats, which are found in things like butter and cheese. But actually, we need to be thinking more about how we can include healthy fats. So things like olive oil, rapeseed oil, avocados, oily fish. I'm more than aware that if you've got conditions like MCAS, for example, it might be really, really challenging to get some of those nutrients in. So if that is the case, then it's about tailoring it for your needs, your individual requirements, and seeing if you can get any in, working with what you've got rather than what you can't have. So micronutrients are still really important, but we just need them in much smaller amounts. So our vitamins and minerals drive hundreds of body processes. I probably talk to a lot of people about how they're involved in like histamine breakdown pathways, because a lot of the patients that I see have histamine intolerance. So we need specific vitamins and minerals to actually break down things in our body, for things to work well. And one thing, so if we ate just blueberries for the rest of our life, for example, that isn't going to give us all the vitamins and minerals that our body needs. We need a diverse range of fruit and veg, so as many different types of plant-based foods as you can possibly get gives you a broader nutrient coverage. And some nutrients might work better together. So taking iron at the same time as a vitamin C source, for example, like a glass of orange juice, helps the iron absorb better. I think diversity, as long as you can achieve that, also supports your gut bacteria, which we think is really important for your health generally. So someone sent in, what supplements do you recommend for us EDS people? So there's absolutely no one size fits all approach. There's no single supplement that I would suggest for everyone that had EDS or HSD. Supplement needs vary massively. Sometimes they're not needed at all, but it depends on what you're eating, if there's any huge gaps in specific nutrients, whether you're absorbing those nutrients. So I'd be guided by what someone tells me they're eating, but also their blood results. And even if your bloods are within the normal range, I'd still be looking, are they at the lower end of normal? Are they on a downwards decline over, the last few years? And sometimes there are absorption problems, and we need to look at, are there better absorbed supplements? Do we need to go in another route? So really, I try and take a food first approach, but that isn't always appropriate. And then we'd look at supplements if needed to bridge those gaps. A dietitian can help personalize this, and the Nourished project is giving heavily subsidized access to an appointment with a dietitian. So either myself or my colleague Alison Holloway. She specializes more in neurodivergence, disordered eating, restricted diets, food fear. So you can look at the Nourished project, which I put the link to on here, if you do need access to a dietitian. So unique considerations for nutrition and EDS and HSD. So there's no one EDS diet. I haven't seen a single patient who has to follow exactly the same diet. There's so many nuances. There's so many different comorbidities, coexisting conditions that can come along with EDS and HSD. As you all know, it rarely comes on its own. So you're not all going to have to follow the same diet. And actually, that's really good news, because it means that you've got a bit of wiggle room, that you can find what works for you, that you can go with actually what food you enjoy as well. Because food isn't just fuel, it isn't just what's nourishing your body, it's really something we use socially as well. And we need to look at symptom management, supporting your whole body, but also flexibility. So your needs will change over time. So what you needed as a younger person will be really, really different to what you need as you get older. For women, your needs change as you go through the perimenopause and the menopause. So things won't often stay the same. And I think sometimes that's really challenging for people as well, especially with the higher incidence of neurodivergence as well. Actually, that change can be really challenging for people, and actually changing their diet can be really, really tough. I think the biggest change that I've seen in practice is probably COVID, and seeing how that's changed needs for people nutritionally. Suddenly people have lived with EDS or HSD their whole lives, but suddenly have got gut symptoms following COVID, or may have developed MCAS. And that's been something where their nutrition has had to develop and adapt because of that. So nutrition deficiencies in EDS. So there are some that are potentially more common. So vitamin D, and that might be due to conditions or comorbidities such as POTS, which limit how much time people can spend in the sun before they feel unwell. Um, in the UK, we're all told to supplement with 10 to 25 micrograms of vitamin D from October to March. So that is something I do recommend. If you have coexisting MCAS, we think vitamin D deficiency can activate mast cells. So it is something that is important to think about in terms of vitamin D levels. In the only way we get our vitamin D is generally through 20 minutes of sunlight from March to October. Obviously, we can't get in the winter. We can't get significant amounts through the food that we eat, so supplementation is important. There are also other vitamins deficiencies that people can experience. So fat soluble vitamins deficiencies is something I see less often, but definitely I see a lot of vitamin B12, folate, and iron deficiency. If anyone follows me on social media, I'm a little bit obsessed with iron because so many people are deficient and told they're normal. So actually, you will be tested for something called ferritin, which is your iron stores. Anything under 30 should be treated as iron deficiency. The guidelines changed last year. Not all the practices have caught up, and some people are being told their levels are normal even when their ferritin's about 20. That isn't normal, especially if you have symptoms like fatigue, which obviously is a key part of often people's presentation with these conditions anyway. Your hair's falling out, you can't sleep. Those are things that I would want to be going to a doctor and saying, look, I'm not sure if my iron's okay, please can you check? I would also be asking for something called transferrin saturation. Just because if you've got an inflammatory condition or you've got MCAS, then ferritin might not be an accurate marker in terms of whether you've got iron deficiency, and transferrin saturation can often be more accurate. I often give my husband as an example. We got his iron results back the other day. His ferritin was completely normal, but I'd asked for transferrin saturation and it came back he had iron deficiency, whereas we'd never have picked that up if I'd just asked for ferritin. So I think they're key things to ask your doctor for if you are worried about your iron. And it can make such a massive difference to actually have normal levels of iron. Like you can start to feel like you have energy. So it's a massive thing to look at with your doctor. All of these deficiencies can be due to so many different things. Restricted diets, gastrointestinal issues, comorbidities, and not being able to go out in the sunlight, which I've already mentioned. So there are so many different reasons why someone with EDS might experience nutritional deficiencies. So I've already sort of banged on about iron. I told you I'm obsessed, but someone did ask, can you explain why so many of us have low ferritin and why the tablets don't seem to do much? What can we do diet-wise? So there is limited research linking low iron to EDS. There is some, but we don't fully understand it. However, it is something I commonly see in practice. Inflammation also affects absorption. So I do think that is probably a key part of why some people with EDS don't seem to be able to hold on to iron or absorb it, as well as the gastrointestinal issues that people experience. Also, if you're having to manage your gastro issues with things like proton pump inhibitors, so things like omeprazole, or H2 antihistamines, so things like famotidine, these can actually affect iron absorption. So it's definitely something that should be monitored if you're on these medications as well. So as I'm sure many of you are aware, gut symptoms are hugely common in EDS. So research suggests up to 93% of people with EDS have gut-related symptoms, and they can include stomach pain, bloating, constipation or diarrhea, heartburn, IBS. And sometimes people have a mix of all of these, and it can be really, really challenging. So there's different reasons why they might be more common. So connective tissue differences, actually you have connective tissue in our gut walls. So it can be fragile, it can be stretchy, it might not push the stool through in the right way. So it can either go too fast, too slow. It can affect those gut muscle contractions. If you have autonomic nervous system issues, so if your nervous system or the things that should happen automatically aren't happening the way you want them to, it can alter how those nerves control digestion, again, speeding up or slowing down these movements. It's also thought that there's an increased pain sensitivity, that people with EDS feel pain more strongly, making this gut discomfort more noticeable. And that is absolutely never me saying it's all in your head, because it is not, but you might feel pain more differently. Also that chronic pain leading to anxiety, again, amplifying those gut symptoms. There is a massive link between our gut and our brain, and it works both ways. So what's happening in your gut can affect your brain, what's happening in your brain can affect your gut. So it can be a really, really vicious cycle. So can diet help with these gut symptoms? Yes, absolutely. What I would say is rarely in isolation. Often if there is a gut-brain connection issue, which there often is, obviously you can get a lot of structural abnormalities with EDS, so compression syndromes, prolapses, but there is also a higher incidence of these disorders which affect your gut and your brain. So diet can play a massive role, but we also need to be looking at what we can do to support that gut-brain connection. So there's actually really good evidence for gut symptoms, things like gut-directed hypnotherapy. So there's you can either see a gut-directed hypnotherapist, or there's an app called Nerva which does it, which is evidence-based, which can be really helpful. But also things like diaphragmatic breathing, and all the stuff that Ju does is really helpful. So make one change at a time is the most important thing with diet. Don't try to change everything at once. You won't know what's working. It will be really overwhelming. And actually, I would try the least restrictive option first. It's really easy when diet is causing you so many issues to go, well, I don't want to eat, let's cut everything out. But unfortunately, it can amplify the problem. So I'd start with the least restrictive option first if you can. Sometimes a good place to start is keeping a food and symptom diary. If you've had any eating disorder history, or you struggle with this, it might be enough to just write down, if you've had symptoms, what you've eaten the last day, rather than track everything. If you do feel able to keep a food and symptom diary, then track meals and how you feel for sort of 1 to 2 weeks. So everything you're eating, all of your symptoms, and see if you can spot any patterns. Sometimes people need a dietitian, a professional, to look at these diaries, because some of the patterns might not be obvious. So it might not be one specific food that's triggering your symptoms. Sometimes it's a build-up over a week of a food chemical, so histamine or FODMAPs, which is another food substance, so a poorly absorbed carbohydrate, which can sometimes cause gut symptoms for some people. So getting that personalized guidance, if you're not sure, can be really, really important. So I've put a few constipation dietary tips because I've seen lots of people struggle with this, and there are some easier, simpler ways if you can tolerate them. I love kiwis in terms of constipation management. So there is a specific type of fiber in them that can help things pass much more easily. So if you are super sensitive to lots of different foods, I would start even smaller than 2 to 3 kiwis a day. I would start with maybe a quarter of a kiwi, see how you get on, and then you can slowly build up. But in terms of supporting constipation, the evidence is 2 to 3 kiwis a day. You don't have to eat them with the skins on. You can peel them, you can chuck them into a smoothie, mix them with a yogurt, whatever works for you. But they can be helpful if you can tolerate them. Psyllium husk is another one. So it's a specific type of soluble fiber. There's evidence it can thicken loose stools, but soften hard ones, help move things. response can be variable. So some people don't tolerate it. Some people it works really, really well. And a bit like everything with EDS and diet is very individual. So start slow if you're going to try it. Start 2 grams a day, mix with liquid. So it can, again, it can be a smoothie, it can be water, it can be your bowl of porridge. And then once you know you're okay with that 2 grams and you think it's helping a bit, you can gradually increase to 10 grams a day over 4 weeks. It's really, really important to drink plenty of fluids with it. The idea is that it bulks up your stool, gives that connective tissue more to push, more to hold on to, and hopefully regulate your bowels a bit more. Some probiotic strains, so probiotics are live bacteria that when you have them, they are delivered to your gut, and that some specific probiotics can help specific gut symptoms. So there are specific probiotic strains that I've put on the screen which might help with constipation. Research is still quite limited. We can't recommend specific brands or really strains yet, apart from the ones I put on the screen. But some people do find them beneficial. If you're going to try one for 12 weeks, see if it makes any difference. If it doesn't, then stop it, and you can always try a different brand. Another thing that can be helpful, but you would want to check with your healthcare professional that is suitable for you, is magnesium oxide supplements. It can help reduce straining and that sense of incomplete evacuation. So generally you would start with 500 milligrams a day, and then you can gradually increase up with medical supervision if needed and tolerated, but that can be helpful for some people. Fibre is really, really important, and I know it's something that some people really struggle with certain types of fibre. So it's about finding a fibre that you can tolerate, and there's different types of fibre work in different types of way in our gut. It can support regular bowel movements. It can help maintain a healthy gut bacteria. It can reduce bloating, improve stool consistency when introduced gradually. There's some research that suggests it might help stabilize mast cells, and there's no particular recommendations for EDS, but in the UK, the recommended amount is 30 grams a day. Most of us in the UK manage about 18 grams a day, so we're way under that. And I have worked with people who actually, if we can slowly, gradually increase their fibre, things have improved in terms of gut symptoms. I've had other people who really can't tolerate certain types of fibre, and so we've had to find ways where we can maybe get different types in that they can tolerate. This is really blurry, and I'm really sorry about that, but I just wanted to give a visual example of what 30 grams a day of fibre could look like. So I did this one for a low histamine diet. If you base your meals around plant-based foods and a healthy, balanced diet, and by that I mean half a plate of your vegetables, a quarter of your whole grain carbohydrates or things like sweet potato or potatoes with their skin, and then a quarter protein, you can generally meet it if you're having healthy snacks as well. If you aren't eating much fibre at the moment and then you suddenly go onto this, you could end up with much worse symptoms. So whatever you do with fibre, you need to gradually increase rather than go tomorrow, I'm going to eat pulses in every single one of my meals, because you will get worse gut symptoms if you do that. So take it slow and steady. So is there such a thing as having too much fibre? I have a daily smoothie of cold meal flaxseed, psyllium fibre husk, and probiotic powder with fruit. So if you're tolerating it and your bowels are working well, then great, you don't need to change it. But it is possible to have too much fibre, especially if your body isn't used to it or you don't drink enough fluids. Like I say, different types of fibre work differently in our body. So if I saw someone, we might be changing the types of fibre that they're having. I've already talked about increasing fibre slowly. If you're having something like this, it's really important to drink plenty of water. That fibre needs fluid to move through your gut properly. The key thing with any of this is listen to your body. You know your body best. If your gut feels worse, cut back a little and increase more gradually. Another person asked, many high histamine foods are actually good for our gut health. Can we still incorporate them into our diet? Obviously, not all of you will have histamine intolerance. So histamine intolerance, for those of you who aren't aware, so histamine is a chemical in our body that we really need. It helps with gastric acid release. It helps with hormone messaging. It is important. We all need it. But when we can't break it down properly or we overproduce, we can become sensitive to the histamine that is coming in through our food and drink. And there's many food and drinks that contain histamine, such as fermented foods, for example. So if you can't have histamine in foods and you have a histamine intolerance, yes, some high histamine foods are gut friendly. So things like sauerkraut, kefir, for example. Tolerance will vary massively. So people with histamine intolerance or MCAS might react differently. Some can tolerate small amounts of high histamine foods, others can't seem to tolerate any. And that might also change too. So I put on the screen a little histamine bucket theory. So we think that it's not just one histamine food that often causes the issue. It's a stacking up of maybe histamine foods, but also other factors. So if someone was ill, they would have more histamine in their body. If they were stressed, at certain times of the menstrual cycle, so just before ovulation and about a week before their periods when their estrogen's high. So there are all these other things that can top up their bucket. So I see women maybe that can tolerate high histamine foods at the beginning of their cycle, but just before ovulation, they really struggle. So tolerance might vary. So there might be times of the month or when you're not stressed that you can tolerate gut-friendly foods like fermented foods. But if you can't, I wouldn't say it's the end of the world. Like there are plenty of other ways to support your gut rather than just having fermented foods. And I know it's really trendy at the moment, but actually focusing on what you can do. So if you can include plant-based foods, great. If, making sure your sleep is okay is really important in gut health, being out in nature, stress management, movement in whatever way works for your body. Like all of these things can support our gut health. So fermented foods aren't the be all and end all. So I'm going to talk a bit about MCAS now, and these are just a couple of slides that I pinched from our selection. So MCAS is an immune disorder in which mast cells are activated by triggers such as food or chemicals in the environment. So mast cells are a key part of our defense system in our body. So they usually release chemicals to protect our body if we have an infection or if we're allergic to something like a peanut allergy, for example. Unfortunately, if you have MCAS, they become alert far too much. So they will become switched on and release these chemicals even when you're not exposed to an infection or a primary allergy, for example. These chemicals can do loads of different things to your body. So the chemicals that are released by these mast cells, the most common one is histamine that you've probably heard of. Tryptase might be another one because it's commonly tested for if they're looking into MCAS. But there's a lot been going around about how you have to have a raised tryptase to be diagnosed with MCAS. You absolutely don't. It's not a great marker. There's other ways you can be tested. I'm not going to go loads into testing today. But what is happening if you have MCAS, these chemicals are being released in far too high quantities when they shouldn't be, and they can cause changes to your bodies. There are hundreds of symptoms that MCAS can cause, and the trouble with a lot of them is they're either treated separately, as you see lots of different consultants. So my husband had seen like a gastroenterologist, a cardiologist, a dermatologist, and all the symptoms are treated separately. And these symptoms can also change over time. So someone might have gut symptoms one day and then cardiac symptoms the next, or their main symptom might be fatigue. To be diagnosed with MCAS, you need symptoms in 2 or more systems of your body. So you would need some of them. You absolutely do not need to have all of these symptoms, but it can affect every single cell of your body. There are comorbidities in MCAS, a bit like EDS, they all overlap. So things like fibromyalgia, EDS, dysautonomia, so POTS, long COVID, ME/CFS, gut symptoms, interstitial cystitis. They're all overlapping conditions. The common MCAS triggers, it's not always diet. Things can be insect bites, certain medications, supplements, chemicals, fragrances. So some people react to like cleaning products in the air or perfumes, extreme temperatures. So there are lots. And if you're looking at diet, my most reactive patients feel like they're reacting to every single food that they eat. Actually, it's probably their system is so activated, their mast cells are so activated that yes, everything they eat does cause them to react, but it's not the food that is the main trigger. So it's important to look at all the other triggers and actually what medical support people can get to try and manage them, because if you become malnourished with MCAS, it can make things much worse. And I have seen people get down to 2 or 3 foods. I strongly feel that if you're diagnosed with MCAS, everyone should be able to see a dietitian as soon as they're diagnosed, and hopefully in the future we'll have some guidance to try and get that implemented in the NHS. So potential triggers for mast cell diseases, I've just put some of them here. This is from a good paper on nutrition and MCAS. Pain also contributes to mast cell activation, which is obviously a key thing in EDS. So they can go together and they can activate each other. Fatigue. There's lots of things that can contribute. So diets followed by those with MCAS. So many people with MCAS experience reactions to food and drink. Again, there's no official diet. Lots of people do try and follow the low histamine diet to see if it makes a difference, but that isn't always people's trigger. Not everyone with MCAS is sensitive to histamine in food. Diet isn't always the main trigger, but it is something that people can look at. The 2 most used diets are low FODMAP diets and a low histamine diet. But if you're doing either one of them, they can become so restrictive. There's so many different lists online. They don't all agree. So make sure you work with someone who does have experience in it, because it can be an absolute minefield. In practice with diet and MCAS, I commonly see people following like multiple dietary restrictions, so low histamine, low salicylate, low oxalate. And again, that can contribute to nutritional deficiency, so it's really important that we look at that. Diets can become very restricted when using this online. And dietary triggers are really individualized. So following these broad lists might not actually be necessary. The SIGI list, for example, you might have heard of for histamine. I really dislike it. Limits loads of actually really healthy foods that are actually low histamine. So the SIGI list says things like beans and pulses are high histamine, which is incorrect when we look at the studies that have actually tested the food. Beans and pulses are fine apart from lentils. It also says like nuts and seeds are high histamine. Actually, the only one that really is pistachio when we've looked at the study. So following these lists online can make you cut out things that you don't necessarily need to. And then with MCAS, if you've avoided a food for a long time, you can actually become more sensitive to it. So if we can keep elimination diets short and then try and reintroduce things slowly, it can be much more beneficial long term. And the aim that I would try and support any diet with MCAS is having as varied a diet as possible. So the key takeaways for diet with MCAS is don't restrict foods based on what has worked for others or broad lists online. Consider a food and symptoms diary, but also write other things that are happening. So where you are on your menstrual cycle, temperature, environment, other things that you think might be contributing. If you're struggling to get enough nutrients, maintain your weight, then get support from a dietitian. Private isn't the only option available. Even if you feel that the NHS dietitian might not understand all of the different conditions, there are places they can go for extra information. I'm always open to dietitians messaging me and asking me questions about these conditions. The main thing in that situation is actually getting your weight stabilized, getting your nutrients stabilized. Not everyone with MCAS needs a low histamine diet. So the question that came in was, should we still supplement with DAO without knowing our own baseline levels? So diamine oxidase is the enzyme that helps break down histamine in the food that we eat and the histamine that our own gut bacteria produces. It might help some people with histamine intolerance, so people who have an issue with the breakdown in histamine, but there isn't actually any evidence for its use in MCAS. I do have patients that use it and potentially find it helpful, but they are expensive. The supplements that you can buy are generally based on pig kidney extract. That is what we have evidence for in histamine intolerance. There are vegan and vegetarian ones available, but we don't have human evidence even for that in histamine intolerance. In terms of testing diamine oxidase levels in your blood, it's not definitive. It doesn't really tell us how it's working in your gut. So this enzyme sits in your small intestine, which is where it does its breaking down. So just because it's normally in your blood doesn't mean it's working well in your gut. And it can also change in terms of like time of day you test it, where you are in your menstrual cycle. So it isn't conclusive. There aren't too many risks with it. They are thought to be generally safe, but they like I say, they might be costly and unnecessary if histamine isn't the main trigger of symptoms. Because with the low histamine diet and these enzymes in MCAS, we're assuming that histamine is the main issue in your MCAS, whereas actually might not be the mediator that's high in your body at all. You could be struggling with prostaglandins or tryptase or any of the other chemicals that are being produced by your mast cells. So if we just think about histamine, we're ignoring all of the other things that are probably happening in your body. Someone else asked, what is the link between perimenopause, menopause, and MCAS? So we don't fully understand it. I do see a lot of women who have maybe had underlying MCAS symptoms their whole life, and then it's just exploded when it comes to perimenopause. And that might be because of the link between estrogen and histamine. So estrogen pushes up histamine, and the more histamine there is, it pushes up estrogen. In the perimenopause, we have peaks of estrogen that are higher than even in a normal menstrual cycle. So although your estrogen levels gradually decline during the menopause, you can also have really random spikes in your estrogen. Estrogen can activate mast cells. Sorry, put my teeth back in. Your progesterone also is one of the first hormones to decrease during the perimenopause, and we think progesterone might have mast cell stabilizing effects. So there are a few reasons why it might explode. There are also women that I see that maybe never had MCAS, and then suddenly it seems to come on during the perimenopause and menopause. So I think we need lots more research in this area. But it can be really, really tough things to go through, because not only are you experiencing those perimenopause symptoms, which are just rubbish in themselves, but you're then experiencing MCAS on top of it. Another question, I'd like to know about reactive hypoglycemia and whether it's related to MCAS. So reactive hypoglycemia is a drop in blood sugar a few hours after eating, which can often cause shakiness, fatigue, brain fog, or anxiety. If you're experiencing those symptoms after eating, we can't just assume it's because of blood sugars. If you've got dysautonomia or POTS, you can also get those symptoms because of that. So you would want to be speaking to your GP to check actually it is a drop in blood sugar, and they might give you things that you can monitor your blood sugars with. There's no studies at the moment that look at the link between reactive hypoglycemia and MCAS, but it is something I see a lot. I'm often asking for endocrinology input to actually check it is reactive hypoglycemia, that there's nothing else going on. If you have been diagnosed with reactive hypoglycemia, there are dietary things that can help. So a healthy, balanced diet, easier said than done for a lot of my patients, but having support with that. Having 5 to 6 smaller, more frequent meals and snacks. Choosing more higher fiber, what we call low glycemic index, so foods that have carbohydrates that are released more slowly into your blood. So for example, new potatoes with skins on are much lower glycemic index than a big bowl of mashed potato, for example. So swapping some of the foods over can make a difference. And when your blood sugars are dropping all the time and you're thinking you need more sugar, often the normal thing to do, or how it feels, is that you need more sugary foods, and then you can be stuck in a loop of having blood sugar drops. So changing your diet can make a difference. Avoiding having really large portions of carbohydrates in one meal, making sure your meal's balanced. For example, if you've got reactive hypoglycemia and you just had a big bowl of pasta and you didn't have anything on it, you're much more likely to have a blood sugar drop than if you had a bit of olive oil on it, some chicken, some vegetables. So including protein foods and healthier fats at meals and snacks can be helpful. Alcohol and sugary foods can also make it much worse. Another one related to blood sugars that came in was, is insulin resistance more common in EDS and MCAS, and how can we improve it? So insulin resistance is when the body doesn't respond properly to the insulin that we release. So the blood sugar, the sugars in our food aren't properly released into our cells and stay more in our blood. There is recent research that suggests that this insulin resistance might play a role in POTS. There's various reasons why this might happen. However, the researchers haven't yet clearly measured how common this is in people with POTS, MCAS, or EDS. So it might happen, but also if you're a woman and you're going through the menopause, we are more at risk of insulin resistance as we go through that. There are other reasons. All of us might be more likely to have insulin resistance as we get older. If we're slightly overweight, for example, or we're unable to move as much, there are other reasons why we might become insulin resistant. If you know you do have insulin resistance, there are dietary things that can help. So eating most of your calories and carbohydrates earlier in the day, so avoiding late evening meals, actually having meals at more regular times of the day, so your body knows when that meal's coming. So if you generally have breakfast at 7, you try and keep that the same every single day. Reducing your added sugars from foods. You don't need to avoid things like fruit. Fruit is absolutely fine. Even if you were ever diagnosed with diabetes, we would just be looking at spreading through fruit throughout the day rather than cutting it out. But I'm talking about those foods like sugary drinks and boiled sweets and things that are going to give you that added sugar. Focusing on the more healthier foods. Mediterranean diet, if you can follow some of its principles, so plenty of lean protein, beans and pulses, nuts and seeds, plenty of plant-based foods, then that is thought to help with insulin resistance. And there is some evidence for intermittent fasting and weight loss, if you're overweight, that can improve insulin resistance. I don't know about anyone else, but my brain's struggling to keep up. There's so many different topics in this presentation. So I hope you're all doing okay. This bit is POTS and diet. So many of you will know what POTS is. Some of you might have POTS. It's a common complex disorder of the autonomic nervous system. So that system that should be controlling all of the automatic things that happen in your body. And it's a collection of symptoms present for at least 6 months, which means that you have cardiovascular abnormalities on standing. So when they test your heart rate from sitting to standing, generally they will diagnose it if there's more than 30 beats a minute change. So there are specific criteria. And there are some people that might not meet the criteria for POTS, but definitely have dysautonomia. So might have similar symptoms but don't necessarily meet that strict criteria. There's no UK study that has assessed incidence or prevalence, but it does seem to have increased since COVID. Symptoms again can overlap with a lot of the symptoms of EDS and MCAS. So I see a lot of people that have dizziness, issues from sitting to stand, but I think some people say, oh no, I can't have POTS because I don't pass out. You absolutely don't need to pass out if you have POTS. You can have other symptoms, shortness of breath, other like feeling like your heart is racing. It doesn't necessarily need to be passing out. I quite like this diagram because it just shows how all of the things kind of interlink together. There are lots of different triggers for POTS. So you might have lived with EDS your whole life and never had POTS, and then you might have a virus or surgery or physical trauma or pregnancy and suddenly develop it. So it is something you can develop at any time in your life. And there are definitely things that worsen POTS symptoms that aren't just diet. So heat, for example, time of day. A lot of my patients really struggle in the morning. Menstruation, prolonged standing, dehydration is huge. I say as I'm taking a massive glass of water. So there are dietary factors that can also make it worse. So people often feel much worse after eating a big meal because we think that people with POTS have a lower blood volume, which is why people are often told to drink more water, have more salt. If all your blood is diverted to your gut when you're eating, it can make your heart work much harder and make you feel much worse. These are the things that are summarized as to help with POTS symptoms in terms of diet. And in the red, you've got the things that might make you feel worse. I think caffeine's a bit of a mixed one. So caffeine can make you feel more alert. So some people with POTS, a little bit is helpful for, so say a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. However, if you have too much, it can cause some of the symptoms like the palpitations and the heart racing to become worse. Dehydration can definitely contribute to worsened symptoms because, as I said, lower blood volume anyway. And then if you're dehydrated, that can make it even lower, make your heart have to work harder. So if you've seen a cardiologist and they've diagnosed POTS, hopefully they would have given you a salt target, because there are certain conditions where telling you to increase salt might not be suitable. So heart disease, kidney disease. If you don't have those and your cardiologist has said go for it, try the dietary things to try and help, then generally aiming for about 2 to 3 liters of water, 10 to 12 grams of salt. So 10 to 12 grams of salt looks like 12 grams would be 2 teaspoons. So it is quite a lot, and some people just don't like the taste on their food. There are electrolytes, some that are specifically designed for POTS that can help, or you can get a prescription of slow sodium. So there are other ways of doing it if you're really not tolerating salt on your food. Small frequent meals can often really help as well. Reducing refined carbohydrates, so they're like those white, really quick released carbohydrates. If you're getting gut symptoms and you have POTS, we'd also want you to get something called a celiac screen, so checking you don't have an immune condition related to gluten, because it is more common with POTS. There are other ways to get fluids in that aren't just water, because some people really struggle to get enough water in. So things like fluids in food, soup, jellies, tea, coffee, or count. There are other ways to do it. And if you like salty snacks, great. There are ideas up here. It can be much more difficult if your diet is limited anyway to do this. So like I say, if you are struggling, let your health professional know, because there are other ways to get enough salt in. Like I said earlier, nutritional deficiencies and EDS are common, but nutritional deficiencies and POTS, there is research that show you can be more at risk. So if I was looking at someone with POTS, I would be thinking about all these nutrients. Thank you for my whistle-stop tour of diet and EDS. Like I say, today really was a bit of a whistle-stop tour of everything. If you want more details on specific things like gut, an EDS or MCAS and EDS, then come to one of the specific talks on it. But if you have any questions, please feel free to fire away.
Thank you so much, Chloe, for covering all of that and for also answering the questions that were submitted. Before I wrap up and talk through some of the concluding slides, I want to just open up to the floor. If there's anybody's got any additional questions, please feel free to come up and ask them to Chloe. No? Have you got one?
Hi, Chloe.
Hiya.
Thank you for speaking to us this morning. I know that some people with MCAS can have salicylate and oxalate intolerances. Unfortunately, salicylates really affect me, which is why things like fragrances can be problematic, including lots of things we wash our bodies with that people might not think to look at the ingredients of. But it also means that a number of the fruits or vegetables that you've mentioned really just don't work for me. And I'm also a type 1 diabetic. So it feels like I'm given a different dietary plan for whoever I see that then has ended up leading me to a really restrictive diet. And it's been a hole I just haven't been able to dig myself out of, including with lots of private help. I was interested, my ears pricked up a little bit when you talked about people might not have an issue with histamine in their food, but they might have a problem with progestograms and tryptase. I know that tryptase can agitate our mast cells. I have something called hereditary alpha tryptosemia. So my tryptase level is always high, but I've never been told whether that might also be something I need to consider around the foods I eat. So if there are things that maybe could be agitating my tryptase level that might not be about low histamine or avoiding salicylates, it might be something entirely different. Can you advise?
So in terms of diet and tryptase and prostaglandins, there isn't much you can do. I guess what I was trying to mean by that is your mast cells release hundreds of chemicals. Histamine isn't the only one. So you might be overproducing other chemicals in bigger quantities than you are histamine. And you obviously are. You're producing tryptase in really large quantities. So in that situation, probably the priorities is what you've already done is limiting your exposure to environmental things you know you're sensitive to, like salicylates. Medical support to stabilize those mast cells in the first place. But you wouldn't, if you don't think like histamine in food is the issue, you wouldn't need to do a low histamine diet. I obviously don't know what dietitians you've worked with, but have they given you like the British Dietetic Association like salicylate sheet and stuff like that, where it shows you what fruit and vegetables you can eat?
Yes, and I have had mixed results with even with some of those lists. That I think it's a bit like histamine. It's actually really difficult to know the level of histamine in food. A lot of it is to do with how fresh your food is. So if I want to eat meat in my diet, I buy it fresh from the butcher, not the supermarket, freeze it straight away, cook from frozen. So I'm doing everything I can in order to keep protein in my diet. That is hugely life limiting and socially means I can't eat out with anyone really because it's just too hard.
It's so challenging, isn't it? And I think salicylates is a huge one that's really challenging, especially if you're having to balance that with histamines as well. I do often see people that have both. I do have meal ideas that is both, so you're welcome to email me. Obviously you've seen dietitians anyway. I don't know how helpful it would be, but I do have meal ideas if you wanted me to send any over.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.
Any other questions? Please feel free to come up. Yeah.
Just more of an addition to the histamine, Chloe. It was about, I was researching it and I found out that there's amines called putrescine and cadaverine. And this is another reason to make sure that your meat, that apparently some aged meats and obviously aged cheeses, and that it has that putrescine and cadaverine can, I think it said, facilitate how histamine crosses the intestinal wall and also can slow its degradation, so that, you know, there's just another little call for like being careful with how you store your meat and how quickly you use your meat and where you get it from and things like that.
Yeah, so there are other amines in food which, like you say, can sit in the same enzyme for breakdown, so can still top up your bucket. So we've just updated the British Dietetic Association low histamine sheet. And we have a column for high histamine foods, but then we also have a column which is orange that is high in amines. So those are things like citrus fruit, for example, or bananas that aren't actually high in histamine, but they're high in other amines. So some people can tolerate those other amines better than they can high histamine food, but it really is about trying them individually, so one at a time, to see what works with your body. And it might be that you can get away with one orange but not two on top of an aged steak, for example. But yeah, other amines definitely do contribute. And I will include that more in the MCAS presentation as well. Yeah, because it is important.
Thanks, Chloe. That was, yeah, it's really interesting. Have to keep your
you.
eye out, don't you?
Any other questions from anyone?
Yes, so it was only something that was hello. Something that was mentioned. You mentioned the Nervo app. Is
Yeah.
that right? Yeah.
It's spelled NERVA.
Yeah, and I've seen it advertised because obviously it's up on my
Yeah.
yeah. Is there anything with the sort of vagus nerve research that sort of seems to be everywhere at the minute as well? It keeps cropping up.
So on that app, is there anything to do with the vagus nerve?
Well, it's generally it's. I just keep seeing that if your vagus nerve is sort of in a bit of a muddle, that can contribute to all of these symptoms. Is there
Yeah.
anything in it basically?
I think some of the stuff on that is interesting, but I think it probably, we know that like your vagus nerve connects your gut and your brain. It's probably all involved in that gut brain connection. So I think anything that you can do like that is helpful. There's other apps like Insight Timer and Headspace that do have breathing techniques or sessions that target that vagus nerve. They haven't been studied particularly, but I think anything that you can do that helps support that gut brain connection can be helpful.
Is there also those you can plug things in now, can't you? That's supposed to. Is that just faddy, or is that again? I mean, it seems like there's quite a bit of research into it, but I don't know
I've
if
seen
it's.
some people that have used those that it has been helpful, and then I've had other people where it's flared them up. So I think it's one of those things that is quite individual as well. And it's really expensive to test
Yeah.
that out. Like, they are incredibly expensive.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thanks. I just wanted to ask if it was another line of inquiry, isn't it? Thank you.
Any other questions? Yep.
Hi, Chloe. I just wanted, I know you said you couldn't recommend supplements, but I just wanted to share something and see what your view is. So with my symptoms, I really did struggle with hyperglycemia, but the severe headaches and migraines are the main problem with my EDS. And I was recommended to have L-glutamine, and I found that really has helped to balance everything out throughout the day, and it did make my headaches and migraines a lot better, as well as the diet stuff. But I just wondered whether you've had that before.
I haven't in terms of migraines. There are other supplements that I know are recommended by some of the migraine doctors. So again, I might use specific supplements for specific symptoms. I'm definitely not anti doing that. Like I talked about magnesium oxide and constipation, for example, but I haven't heard L-glutamine and migraines before.
Okay.
But if it works for you, great. It is thought to be safe. There's some research it might help with like gut barrier integrity, so how healthy your gut barrier is. So it's great that it's helped.
Yeah. And the other one is methylated folate. So because we don't absorb, you highlighted that we don't absorb enough folate. Again, I understand there's research that for people with EDS, if you take methylated folate, you can then absorb it, and that can make you feel a lot better in yourself. So again, I've tried that. It seems to be working for me, but I do understand that, you know, it's not one size fits all and everyone's very different. But I just thought I'd share that and see if you had any views on that as well.
There is some really limited research that suggests that some people with these conditions might have issues with methylation. So if I was going to supplement with like B vitamins or folate, I do generally use the methylated versions. And I know there are now some clinics that offer like genetic testing for methylation and things like that. But I think folate, like I would look at people's blood tests as well to see if there's enough. I have often seen it being low, but like you say, it might be a problem with actually converting the folate to the active form.
Okay. All right, lovely. Thank you.
Any others? Okay. Well, thank you so much, Chloe, again, for answering those additional questions. I just wanted to bring everything together in order to help us integrate what we've explored today. So I just want to leave you with some reflections around how do we manage nutrition and lifestyle changes in a sustainable and compassionate way, which is, I think, very important when you're living with this lifelong chronic condition. Those who've worked with me before will know that I love a good visual and framework. And one of my favorites around understanding, creating new habits and healthy behaviors is this model here. So do we have the capability, the skills and the knowledge and the confidence? And today, thanks to Chloe, we've definitely been given a lot of knowledge. And do we have the environment and support to make that possible? And most importantly, do we have a meaningful reason to keep going? So our intrinsic motivation. And I just think when these things align, changes that we need to make to help support our bodies and, you know, manage our symptoms becomes more natural and obtainable. And of course, from a neuroscience perspective, how we speak to ourselves, right, with kindness, with self-compassion is so important. So shifting that mindset around, I can't eat this, I can't do that, or I have to do this for the rest of my life. I just want us to consider reframing that and reshifting that to some of the suggestions that I've made on the slide. And then finally, I'll leave you with the final slide of some key themes. Chloe, if we can just move there. Yeah. So, you know, I think it's really easy to fall into the habit with this condition of just all or nothing mentality. I want to try and tackle everything. But actually, as Chloe has described herself in her practice, small, consistent steps actually makes a lot of difference. And utilize things like habit stacking. So if you know that you need to stay on top of your fluids, make sure that you compound that on top of existing routines that you already do. Again, I've highlighted the importance of intrinsic motivation and, you know, approaching this with curiosity, right, and not self-blame. When you're entering a flare-up, it's really easy for us to think, what have we done wrong? What have I done? What have I eaten? I shouldn't have eaten that, or I shouldn't have done that. But actually, let's try and learn from this. What can this teach me for my next flare-up? I haven't failed here. This is something that I can learn from. And finally, celebrating wins, no matter how small. I think gratitude and, you know, positive reinforcement can be powerful tools. And this isn't about positive, you know, toxic positivity. It's just about making space and room for things like gratitude, which will help, of course, in terms of managing this lifelong condition that we have. So ultimately, it's really not about perfection when it comes to diet, really, is it? I think it's a partnership between your body, between you, and, you know, our bodies do fail us a hell of a lot, but it's actually thinking about those small acts of nourishment, the self-kindness that I've described, to help achieve long-term stability through nutrition. So those are my thoughts for us that I want us to reflect on. And thank you so much, Chloe, for your time. Really appreciate it. And I'm sure you'll get many inquiries for the Nourish programme off the back of this. And we can't wait to join you for the next webinars.